Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with attorney Ron Satija. I hope I said that first name right. I sometimes mess up Ron. Did I say that right, Ron?
Yes.
Ron Satija. He's a good colleague, good friend of mine that I've known for, I guess, 5 or 6 years since I moved to Austin. He's currently practicing law with the Hayward Law Firm in Austin. He also works as appointed United States trustee and has been doing that for about 10 years. And as I said, I had the honor of working with Ron for years and got to know Ron. And so, Ron, what I'd like to first just get completely off script, and would you just introduce yourself? Who is Ron Satija that I'm talking to for my listeners?
Probably basic facts. I've been practicing law here in Austin for a long time now, over about 20 years, and came here. I was a transplant from the Northeast, moved here to go to law school back in 1994 from New York. I never thought I would be moving west of the Hudson River. But I moved a little further west of the Hudson River and have been here more or less for 27 years, with little jaunt away 1999 to 2001. I was in San Francisco and I was in Spain for a little while. But
Wow.
I've been in Austin for a long time. I've seen the city grow, seen the restaurant offerings change, improve quite a bit. So
Well, that's good. So you're
yeah.
really those of us who've just moved here in the last 5 or 6 years, you're a native.
I don't get to be called a native, unfortunately. I don't sound like a native. I don't have a memory of like Armadillo World Headquarters or anything like that. So no, I those people are still above my league.
Let's stay with you personally for just a second, Ron. What do you consider your most important traits?
Probably I think the most important trait in practicing law in general is, compassion. Intelligence, obviously. I don't want to toot my own horn or anything, but obviously, to bankruptcy law intersects with all the other fields of law. Be it family or securities or corporate. There's property law. Tort. There's a million kinds of law that you come into contact with every day in bankruptcy, and you just have to accumulate those in your mind and kind of keep them there. And when a problem pops up, just remember, yeah, this is how we dealt with this in a previous case, or there's some parallel here in another kind of law, or whatever it is. But and then I would just say compassion for everyone involved in the process, be it debtors, be it creditors, be it suppliers, parties that have been sort of blindsided by the bankruptcy. And then I think a neglected area is the practitioners themselves. Bankruptcy practitioners take on a lot of the stress of their clients on both sides, be it debtor or creditor side. And they get stressed out. They work long hours, and bankruptcy practitioners, I don't think of them as retiring. I think of them as dying with their boots on. So, they're people that we need to take care of as well.
Well, the thing about you personally, you gave me a book the day you left and went to Hayward. Gave me a book called Practicing Peace, and I opened it, and it says, there's just a quote at the beginning: if somebody doesn't begin to provide some kind of harmony, we will not be able to develop sanity in this world at all. Somebody has to plant the seed so that sanity can happen on the earth. And you're a spiritual guy as well. I won't dive into that much, but you do bring calmness to a crazy. Our practice of law can sometimes be very crazy, demands and move fast, and I don't know that I've ever seen you not be able to stay calm. How do you do that, Ron?
Well, you didn't know me in the early part of my practice. Bankruptcy law has so many deadlines. It's very fast paced. And I was kind of a slow-paced person when I started out, and just running into all those deadlines and all that calendaring, I was pretty crazy and stressed out for the first few years of my practice. And I went to a business coach early on, and I went to her with the idea that I was going to learn how to calendar a little better, or how to manage people a little better, how to make a little bit more money in my business, how to manage clients a little better. But that isn't what she wound up teaching me. I walked in there all stressed out, and she gave me a book called The Power of Now. And I'm
I've
sure you've
read that
heard of
book.
it.
Yeah, I've read it.
Yeah. And, I'm looking at it, she gives me some homework, and I'm looking at it, and this is a book about meditation. And I'm like, why the hell did you give me a book about meditation? And it did take a few years for the lessons to sink in. But, it just made me realize that whatever is going on in your life, the stress comes from the way that you think about it, and the way that you deal with it, not with the outside circumstances. I mean, there are people in this world who deal with far more stressful circumstances daily. I mean, just getting water sometimes, or medical care, providing for
Right,
their children,
right.
education. And for me to be so stressed out, when everything was really going well. I mean, I simply had more business than I had the mental capacity to deal with at the outset. Um, and so, that was a great lesson. Just 2 or 3 years into my practice of law, and then since then, I mean, there have definitely been reversals. There have definitely been losses. I mean, I tell my clients that I bat about 600 in hearings, which makes me the best hitter of all time. But you're going to lose some,
Right.
and that's I mean, the facts, the situation, the law might be against you, but I mean, you could bring those things to settlement. You can get compassion for the other side. You can get compassion from the other side, and you can cobble a way through for your clients. Even in a situation that maybe they're very stressed out by, and if you remain calm.
I found, Ron, as I've gotten older, I've been at this about 35 years now, and I always used to want to win. Now my focus is I want to find a win-win situation for both my client and the client on the other side. And my guess is in the bankruptcy context, that's true as well, is it not?
Well, the bankruptcy code is almost magical to me. Um, it is geared towards a balance, balancing the interests of the debtors, the creditors, other stakeholders, governments, whoever is involved in the case. And it sometimes it almost channels you to the right result, to a balanced and a harmonious result. I mean, everyone is not happy at the end of a bankruptcy case, but I think it really, the drafters of the code were very wise, and I think that the results that you come to are often, something that everybody in the process can live with.
Let me back up a little bit. Why bankruptcy? When you started the thought, hey, I'm going to take my English undergraduate degree from Columbia University in New York and go start a bankruptcy. I'd like to go to law school and start a bankruptcy practice. That I take it by your laughing. That's not what happened. So how did you get into the bankruptcy field?
I I mean, when I went to law school, I went with the idea of being a professor. I had studied philosophy a little bit before going to law school, and it was too much of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and the philosophical problems that you deal with in the law, are much more practical, have much more impact on normal people. And so that's, became what I wanted to study. But then I sort of took a detour when I fell in love with contracts and tax and other commercial areas. And so I started gravitating towards business, and it was really not something I had any interest in at all. And bankruptcy law in particular, I was looking for a job, and I heard that a friend of a friend needed help, and so I sent my resume. That was the one resume that I sent at that time, and I asked my friend, "Hey, what does your friend do?" And he said, "Bankruptcy." And I said, "Oh, okay, bankruptcy." I took a class on it. you know
Right,
that was
right.
that was it. And yet I feel that this practice has become an essential part of me in the last almost 20 years. um,
When you say an essential part of you, tell our listeners what you mean by that.
I don't think I would have studied meditation or become interested in the same way in um, balance and harmony and working problems out for people in the same way if I had not become a bankruptcy lawyer. And bankruptcy lawyers are funny because there's so few of us. We practice on every side of the situation, be it representing debtors, creditors, trustees, other stakeholders. And so you learn about the interests of the other parties, and how even though your client really really wants what they want, um, to look at things from other perspectives than that, and maybe understand what is a better result for the system.
Well, and I love that answer. You talked about there's so few of us. So I take that to mean that, I practiced law in Amarillo for years, and the bar was small enough, and frankly, the community was small enough that we got to know each other real well, and relationships, both professional and personal relationships, were paramount. And do you find that relationships, and you're developing relationships with co-counsel or opposing counsel or judges, or tell me about relationships in the bankruptcy context?
I think that is probably the most important thing. I mean, you could get into a bankruptcy case and, you know, charge your client a small amount, reach out to the other parties, work it out. And when you have good relationships with the other parties, or I mean, how legal billing goes. I mean, you could charge hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars and not achieve a good result if you're just fighting, all day, every day.
Right, right. S- um, so talk to me about, we're going through a either a really good time in the economy or a really bad time in the economy, depending on who you are. And it's very odd. I mean, COVID has changed things in my practice tremendously. But talk to me about what the bankruptcy field is like right now, as a result of what we've just been through or what we're going through.
Well, business bankruptcies have remained relatively stable through the pandemic, maybe a little bit of a drop off in 2020. But consumer bankruptcies have dropped tremendously. In 2000, early 2000s, 2010, we had 1.5 million personal bankruptcies a year filed. There was a tremendous spike in 2005 up to over 2 million because of a change in the law. But, I think we could have reasonably expected over 1 million bankruptcies every year if the economy had, been, stayed what it was. I think that the sort of hyper economy over the last few years has improved the tide for a lot of people because bankruptcies have been falling the last few years. But this past year was a precipitous drop in bankruptcies down to about a little over 500,000 personal bankruptcies. So it's 1 million a year drop, and from 2010 or from the early 2000s. And I think if the economy stays revved up like this, plus if government keeps spending on individuals in the way that it has been, or in the way that it seems to be heading, I think personal bankruptcies will continue to stay pretty low over the
Really?
last few years. Yeah, I mean over the next few years. Sorry.
If we were having this conversation a year ago, I think we both would have thought that answer would be just polar opposite.
Yeah, I would have guessed so. All of my fellow practitioners said, "Oh yeah, bankruptcy is going to explode." And we've been thinking all along maybe it's being held down because lenders are not pushing their options against the debtors. And there's been a moratorium on foreclosures. There's been a moratorium on evictions. And but even as that has led up, we're seeing a very tight labor market. So people are somebody wants a job, they can get a job, it seems like at this point. um, and then of course the government is spending so much right now on individuals and programs that support individuals. And I think that that's wonderful. I think that if everybody has a floor that they can operate from, it's going to give them the ability to reach for the stars. Whereas if you're trying to cobble together your housing or your daily food, and are dealing with the stress of that all the time, I think it's very hard to focus on what you can do to improve this world.
Right, right. I love that answer. Ron, there's always going to be people who have financial problems, and some are self-caused, some are not self-caused. Through the years, I've received calls from people who are embarrassed, frankly. My first few minutes talking to them is, "Don't be embarrassed, just talk to me." So I kind of have a general counsel type practice where I part of what I do is quarterback people to the right attorney. If I have a client who needs bankruptcy help, you or some of your compadres, Charlie Shelton, I've relied heavily upon, and I appreciate that. So talk to me about what if a listener is considering is having some financial problems. What should he or she, or if it's a business, do to think through whether or not bankruptcy is an option they should consider?
Well, you had asked me another question, um, kind of as your preliminary questions,
Right.
which was how do you keep yourself from going into bankruptcy?
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't normally think about the answer to that question, because by the time people are talking to me, we're really talking about bankruptcy or its alternatives,
Right.
for the most part. But very occasionally somebody will come to me and want to file bankruptcy, and I'll say, well, why don't you do this? I mean, I had a recent situation where there was it was a tech company, and the tech company was fighting with an investor, and I said, well, why don't you do the deal that he wants you to do? I mean, it's the rising tide lifts all boats, and if you can overcome your animosity, then you could both really make money out of this, as opposed to filing the bankruptcy and having to either scrape together cash for the IP, or have him beat you out and buy the IP. Why don't you work together and maybe allocate him a little bit more for the litigation expenses that he's had, and things like that. And so it's funny. My experience at Hajar Peters was really an experience that helped me think through those business decisions and transactional matters a little bit more. It was between working with you and other people there, Kareem, Dave Valenti. It really helped me to think about, kind of what's the upside for this client at this point, as opposed to just thinking about what's the downside to this
Right.
client. So, I mean, and as you know, I had a fantastic experience there at Hajar Peters, and still miss my former colleagues, tremendously.
Well,
So,
I miss walking down the hall and seeing you, Ron.
for
Our
sure.
offices are really close. Well, what are some of the pitfalls that you see when people are in bankruptcy and you're seeing those clients? What are some pitfalls that could have been avoided? And that may be too general of a question, but if it is, tell me. Say objection, but
Well, I mean, every business should take risks. You don't have a choice. If you're in business, you are out there operating in the world, taking risks every single day. I mean, if you're a trucking company and you put a truck on the road, you are taking a risk. And the most basic thing to do to protect against that risk, which is to have insurance. And plenty of insurance, because what people can sue for in trucking accidents,
right.
for example. So every risk that you take, it should be measured, and you have to ask, if this goes bad, what's my plan B? Whether it's cash reserves, well, insurance, of course, cash reserves, access to capital, or if you have a plan B that involves merger or an asset sale, you say, hey, if this business doesn't work out, then, in the way that I need it to, maybe I can sell this asset and dissolve the business, something that is short of bankruptcy. But another thing I think is keeping in contact with all of your investors and creditors, whether or not that relationship stresses you out, to sort of overcome the stress of that and stay in touch with them, and make them your partners, as opposed to making them adversaries. I think that those are some of the most important things.
I couldn't agree more. I remember I was doing a podcast early in COVID, and when after COVID had hit, and I was asked the question, what should businessmen do? And I can't remember all of the answer, but one answer I had is stay in touch with your banker. Call them, tell them what's going on, and just keep that relationship so that they're not surprised. And so I think that's great advice. How's your practice changed over the last 18 months as we've gone through this historic pandemic?
I mean, I feel like my practice has changed every single year since I've
Really?
since I have been in bankruptcy. Well, I started out representing debtors in Chapter 13 and Chapter 7, which are mostly smaller consumer debtors. I moved into litigation. I became a trustee. I started representing more in the way of creditors. And then, when I joined Hajar Peters, I started representing a lot more real estate lenders. As you know, you all have a lot of clients there, banking clients, um, and more tech companies came into my practice during that time as well. And then, Todd Hedden and Charlie Shelton joined me when we were over there, and it's really enabled me to sort of step back and take a bigger look at the practice, and focus a little bit more on my trustee practice. So these last few years, instead of an assistant going through bank statements and prepping me, I'm able to prep myself for cases, and look at different issues that I didn't, obviously I handled before, but, couldn't necessarily handle personally, or had an assistant help with, or something like that. I can become involved more now in the cases that I want to be involved in, as opposed to, kind of dealing with emergencies that are coming across my desk every day.
Right.
And now at the new firm, I mean, we have basically 10 bankruptcy lawyers. So there isn't, any issue that comes across my desk, I can say, oh yeah, I have somebody that can help you with that. Although the biggest change for me personally has been that we don't do consumer bankruptcies at the new firm. So I've, gone away 180 degrees from my original practice, and my original love in bankruptcy practice. So.
Wow, that's my practice has been somewhat akin to that. What is a bankruptcy trustee?
Well, so a bankruptcy trustee is an officer appointed by the court who is sort of in charge of the assets of a debtor. And I am usually a Chapter 7 trustee, so the court appoints me to, somewhere around 30 cases a month, individuals and businesses that have filed Chapter 7. There's a standing bankruptcy trustee for Chapter 13.
And
And
what,
then
tell us, excuse me for interrupting you. What's chapter 7? What's chapter 13? Just real briefly.
Chapter 7 is what you think of as a classic bankruptcy. 4 months, you're in, you're out, you discharge all your debt, except for fraud and, some ongoing, things that can happen in the case. Chapter 13 is a repayment plan. And so you're usually in it for somewhere between 36 and 60 months, paying back some percentage to your creditors. And both of those, Chapter 13 can only be utilized by individuals. Chapter 7 and Chapter 11 can be individuals or businesses. And then, of course, Chapter 11, you could reorganize everything from an individual to a small medical practice to an airline, to whatever size business, all the
So
way
as
up to what was that? Some of the bigger businesses that have filed. I mean, J.C. Penney filed recently, and Gold's Gym filed recently, and just lots of big businesses.
so as a trustee, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead and continue what you were saying is what you do as a trustee.
So, in an individual case, I determine what they get to keep when they file bankruptcy, and what I can sell to pay their creditors. And then I sell it, pay their creditors, and I get paid in part on what I distribute to creditors.
So are you friendly to the debtor? Are you not friendly to the debtor? Or what do debtors and creditors think of a bankruptcy trustee?
Well, I mean, I'm adverse to the debtor, and I'm generally on the side of the creditors. But oftentimes, a case is filed, and there's a lot of animosity, and a trustee comes in and is a neutral and experienced party, and is able to calm things down, and calmly evaluate the debtor's assets, and what can be gotten, and sold to pay creditors off. Um, before the bankruptcy is filed, the creditor may have little to no information about what it can eventually get from the debtor. So if the creditor thinks the debtor is rich, then the creditor may be, very aggressively pursuing the debtor, and the debtor is like, I don't have money to continue this litigation. So when they file bankruptcy, they file schedules under penalty of perjury that list all of their property and all of their income, certain transactions prior to the bankruptcy being filed. And, with some good questions, some investigation, you begin to understand the debtor's situation and realize, hey, they really don't have any money to pay this debt. And so I think that in itself is a calming um, of the situation.
Well, and so let me summarize what I think a trustee does, and then you tell me where I'm wrong. You're really kind of an officer appointed by the bankruptcy judge, and he or she says, go figure this out for me. Go look at the assets carefully and determine how you think they need to be distributed, whether kept by the debtor or distributed to creditors, and then report back to me how that should happen. Is that anywhere close?
That is basically right. I'm not appointed by the bankruptcy judge, though. I'm appointed by the United States Department of Justice. They
Okay.
have an arm called the United States Trustee Division, and they appoint all the bankruptcy trustees, be it panel Chapter 7 trustees, be it standing Chapter 13 trustees, or case by case Chapter 11 trustees.
That's interesting, Ron.
Yeah.
Why would that be? I mean, why does the Department of Justice make the appointment as opposed to a bankruptcy judge? Because it seems like you're doing the and I don't mean this negative to any bankruptcy judge that may be listening. They're all in. But it seems to some extent that you may be doing the bankruptcy judge's job. He or she just doesn't have time to do it all. So just curious as a attorney, why it would be that the Department of Justice would be appointing this as opposed to the bankruptcy judges, if you know. Just curious.
I'm not very educated about the history of bankruptcy practice. A lot of bankruptcy lawyers have been around, 30, 40 years and have seen, it develop from the 1978 code and maybe even practice prior to that. But my understanding is that at one point, bankruptcy judges did actually do all of that stuff.
Right.
And, they decided that the drafters of the code, I think, decided that there needed to be, kind of somebody else involved to take this burden off the judges, or provide an outside perspective. I mean, now, so when I hold creditors meetings, I want to say there might even be a statute or code section out there that says that a judge can't even attend the meeting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. This is heavy. Bankruptcy's heavy. The topic of bankruptcy is heavy.
Yes.
And yet, just what I just saw, just the last 5 seconds from you, is what I saw as I interacted with you um, when you were a few offices down, and I saw that there were times I'd see you on the phone, and I'd see the smiles and the laughter and even some humor. How do you do that in such a heavy world of bankruptcy?
Well, I mean, there is definitely a lot of stress, that people have experienced, before they come to me. And, I think in some ways your job is harder than mine, because you're advising a client, who's a very successful person, and you have to sort of break the news to them that they may have to talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. So the hard work has been done in a way once I get the referral. So at that point, I mean, I'm really just leading them to the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's not a part of the process. That's the downgoing part of the process in a way. That's part of the, rising up part of the process. So you've gone through the inferno, and maybe I get purgatorio and paradiso.
So do you find yourself needing to act provide a calm environment or even an encouraging environment at times? Or is that a part of your practice as you see it, Ron?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I'm not calm, how can the client ever be calm about it? They're very caught up in, the creditors who are chasing them or the litigation that they've been involved in for some time. And I represent a lot of creditors as well. And just recently, I was talking to a creditor, and I said, I mean, you have a lot of rights in this situation, and you have a lot of power in this situation. But, I mean, let's not exercise all of that. I mean, if you're dealing with an old lady on the other side in a, trying to take her house or something, then,
Right.
it probably even looks better to the bankruptcy court if you exercise a little bit of compassion. Bankruptcy doesn't always favor the most aggressive party, because it does have that intricate balance that it sets up, that the code sets up between all of the different players. And bankruptcy judges are definitely the smartest people in the room. So they know when, kind of what result they want to get to at the end of the day, I think.
You're just saying that because to back up what I said a while ago, you hope I got in trouble with bankruptcy judges. Now you're sucking up to them by saying that. I'm kidding.
they're
Well,
they're all much smarter than me for
well,
sure.
that's great.
So,
Well, tell me, what have I not asked you about, Ron, about the practice of bankruptcy or the concept of bankruptcy that a listener, whether that be a business person or an attorney, what have I not asked you that I should have asked you or that you think is important for people to know?
well, you asked a couple of general questions as well that I thought were interesting. You asked, for those of us constantly seeking to find ways to better serve our clients, how would you suggest that we address those concerns?
Yes.
And I was thinking about that question, and I was thinking that you should definitely just talk to them and understand their real needs and concerns, not just what they want to tell themselves or think that other people want to hear. So I thought that was a great question. And you and I were talking a little bit more about, or earlier about, kind of really delving into their situation and confronting it honestly, as opposed to our Facebook or Instagram world in which everything may look cheerful, you know,
Yes.
and to really truly understand what's going on. Um, Another question that you asked that I liked was, what do you consider are the top three qualities of an attorney? An attorney needs to effectively partner with his or her business clients. And my first one was, don't be afraid of the numbers. There are a lot of numbers in business, and those numbers get carried over in bankruptcy. For example, if a debtor files a Chapter 11 case, you have to file sort of a 13-week projection of, what the business is going to look like. Um, so you have to understand the numbers, and you have to not be afraid of them. And I think, what goes hand in hand in that, number two, is understand the business that they're in. Um, just take a little bit of time to understand, who their contracts are with, and what they look like, and who their suppliers are, and are their suppliers really crucial? Are there other suppliers? Is there another business that they could, blink their eyes and move into or something? I mean, whatever it is. And then I think the third thing was that lawyers are so often deal killers, and to try not to be a deal killer.
I
you
love that.
know. Uh,
I love that. Well, well, my son's in his last quarter at Baylor Law School. He was a history major. So I'm sitting here talking to an English major who just talked to me about don't be afraid of the numbers. Be afraid of understanding the business. And so, how difficult was it, Ron, for an English major to become someone who can understand the numbers, can get in and to understand all kinds of businesses? What was your third point? I loved your third point, but I forgot what it was.
oh, not to be the deal killer.
Oh yeah, not to, so and so. Tell me how, which is the most important perhaps of the three. I guess the first two lead to the third. But how does an English major get in a position where you can do those three things?
Well, I mean, I grew up a little bit in business. My parents owned a convenience store when I was little, and I worked there every day. I mean, from when I was like 12 to 17. So I realized that, you just have to work hard, to make money, and you do have to, understand that business. When the magazine subscriptions come in, and when the other kinds of inventory comes in, and you know uh, how to figure out if you're making a profit, count the money at the end of the day, that sort of thing. Um, but I mean, it's certainly been hard because it has not been my area of interest. But I mean, if you are interested in Shakespeare at all, for example, I mean, Shakespeare writes about every realm of life, and there's often, imagery and really detailed discussions of money and investments. And I mean, in the Merchant of Venice, for example, I mean, whatever play you're looking at, um, he was just very, very conscious of business, the business of the theater, and how to make money, and he wound up making a good amount of money for himself and sending it home, and buying the fanciest house in town in Stratford, where we can go and visit today. Um, Maybe we can't visit. I don't remember if we can visit his house that he bought, or the house where he was born. I don't remember. I've never been, so I'm planning to go one of these days.
Very cool. Well, and I go back to those 3 points that you had, and particularly not killing the deal. And many times I think attorneys forget that they really aren't the businessmen. A lot of times I'm helping people that have been very successful long before they met me, and so sometimes I think that attorneys can overstep their bounds and think, they've hired me to advise them not only on the legal issues but the business issues as well, and that's probably harder. It's pretty easy for me to stay almost away from the business decisions and focus only on the legal issues. That would be harder in the bankruptcy context, I would think.
Well, I mean, if I usually just ask them, what's it going to take to make this go? Like, are you going to have to let people go? How are you going to increase the business, in order to pay, some percentage to these debts? Are there assets that you can sell that are going to help you to pay these debts? And sometimes if it's a real estate business, then the suggestion, just might be presented to you right away. Sell the real estate. I mean, the real estate Austin and market in Austin is so supercharged that you're going to make some money from that. But sometimes the issues don't present themselves as neatly, and you do have to kind of work with their business advisors to figure out what the next step is. I think of the law in general as a vessel, and you pour the business in, and you're not, I mean, the vessel and the liquid don't you can't really cross that boundary. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I've talked to you some about the fractional general counsel practice that I've had, and you actually, Charlie Shelton, called me the last week. I know that he has a potential client that is actually asked him to come in house and be general counsel, and he called me to ask me how I was doing it, and just from what you know, what would be your primary concerns for clients that are talking to or thinking about considering a fractional general counsel?
Well, my recollection is I told him to call you. I said, they cannot afford to pay you for a full-time in-house position. you
Right.
know so they need to think creatively about how they're going to use you, and I know that Johnny knows all about this stuff, so give him a shout. I think that was the way that our conversation went. um, I saw that you asked that question, and I didn't really give it a lot of thought other than that economic angle that I mean, lawyers are, I mean, lawyer money. I mean, God knows you're hoping to make at least $200,000 or $300,000, a year. I mean, that's what they tell us in law school anyway. You're gonna make good money. And when does a business cross that threshold that it can really afford to pay, that kind of money or more, bonuses, or and think through, how do you compensate that in-house lawyer, and you know um, how do you deal with the fact that this is your employee, but they're also telling you, hey, you can't do that. you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
I would think it would be easier to hear that from someone who is outside, who you are paying as a consultant, as opposed to your employee, who you're paying, whether you have something for them to do that day or not. you know
Ron,
um,
I've actually sat in that seat where my largest client. I was at a board meeting, and one of the most influential board members looked at me and said, "You're going to do X," and X, it wasn't in the best interest of the company, and I had to say, I can't advise you to do that, and so you will need to find another attorney to do that. And if that was my sole source of revenue, that would have been very difficult to do, no question about that.
yes, for
So
for sure.
I may have cut you off. Had you finished your answer, Ron, when I butted in?
No, no, no. That was all. I really like your example. Because clients come to me every day and ask me, "Hey, can I do this?" And I'm like, "No,
Yeah, yeah,
no, you,
yeah.
no, you can't do that."
Well, we've been going almost an hour, Ron. So there's always a final question that I always just read word for word, because I think it's important. Because I think, particularly, for instance, if my son is listening to this, and I doubt that he listens to any, but the father, has to hope. But in the spirit of shifting the law, what is your best advice for our current and aspiring law professional audience on how legal counsel can serve business clients as principal partners and advisors, not just lawyers?
I mean, gosh, I really feel like we've covered a lot of this in the talk. I mean, I think between being a good neutral party, that's not caught up in the success of any particular venture, part of the business or business strategy. Having compassion on all of the parties in the system. I mean, business people are such hard chargers, that it, yeah, I think oftentimes they don't stop to think about, the fallout to different, stakeholders. Um, and being able to slow that train, or get people to think outside the box a little bit, again, without being a deal killer. I think those kind of crucially important traits of a lawyer.
I love that answer. Ron, I miss you.
Ditto.
It's just been a joy, Ron, to spend the last hour with you, to really be able to, even when we were essentially partners here, we never had the time just to sit down and talk. And so that's one of my favorite things about doing the Shifting the Law podcast, is just having an opportunity to talk to friends and to colleagues. And so I appreciate your time, Ron. I appreciate who you are. And I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me doing this podcast this morning.
This is really neat. Like you say, you get wrapped up in practicing law all day, every day, and to take the time to have a conversation like this is just, so far out of the ordinary for my day. I really appreciate it.
Well, Ron, come to see me, and again, thanks for being on Shifting the Law.
Will do. Thank you.